Hi there, my name is Paul Sargent. Welcome once again to AP European History. Today we're going to take a look at the wartime conferences of World War II. Now it's important to understand that throughout the war, the Allies worked together to try and plan not only how to fight the war itself and beat Germany and their allies, but also what the war or what the world should look like after the war was over. And they're going to plan out the post-war world that's going to define the world we live in up until the modern day. Now, the AP exam can be very tricky on these conferences. So it's very important, especially with the last two, to really understand what they're all about. But let's start at the beginning and get you through the Allied conferences of World War II. Enjoy.
So our first conference is called the Atlantic Charter. In August of 1941, Franklin Delano Roosevelt of the United States and Winston Churchill from Britain met secretly after the invasion of the Soviet Union. And they came up with an agreement on really two major points. Number one, no territorial changes would be made after the war that went against the wishes of the inhabitants of that region. In other words, they reinforced the idea of self-determination. They also reinforced Wilson's idea of a general assembly. They were to call this one the United Nations. That would be a permanent engine for security. Now at this point, the United States is not yet in the war, but they're going to begin to work with the Allies, and Stalin is going to soon endorse this agreement. So in 1943, FDR and Churchill came together again at a place called Casablanca. And there, they talked out and decided on a couple of things. Number one, they decided to call for unconditional surrender from all of the enemies. There would be no conditions to this. But secondly, they also agreed that they would invade Europe through Italy first. Now, this really upset Stalin because his forces were besieged in Leningrad, his forces were fighting in Stalingrad, and he knew that he had to bear the brunt of the entire German army. He wouldn't forget this.
So you can see at this point that Britain and the United States are working very closely together. They've got an idea of the future and they understand how this war is going to be fought. But they have yet to bring in perhaps the most important ally in the war, the Soviet Union. And Stalin, who's fighting the war against Germany very strongly, is sitting in the shadows and waiting for themselves to be included. And so they start conferencing with the other side as well.
So in November of 1943, we have the first meeting of the Big Three. Stalin is invited to Tehran to conference with the Allies. It's here that they agree to an Allied invasion of Western Europe in 1944, and they talk about the post-war world. They agree that the victors are not only going to push for unconditional surrender, but they're going to set the terms for what happens after the war. Stalin agrees to turn his attention to fight Japan after Germany is defeated, but Eastern Europe becomes a big point of contention. Stalin wants to have control of Eastern Europe. Churchill wants to have free governments in Eastern Europe. And Roosevelt believes he can be the mediator and can work with Stalin to create a real peace that the United Nations can then keep going.
Now I hope at this point you can start seeing that there's a growing conflict between the West and the East, between Britain and the United States and the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union is definitely under Stalin feeling a little pressure. And they're feeling like they need to be a part to really define this post-war world. It's these last two conferences that we're about to talk about that become very, very important.
So in February of 1945, the Big Three met again at Yalta. Stalin here agreed he would enter the Pacific War within 3 months after Germany surrendered, and he also agreed to free elections throughout Eastern Europe. They also created the plan for a United Nations, which they believed would start meeting in April of 1945. It would basically be made up of two things. First of all, a General Assembly where every country in the world that wanted to be a part of this organization could participate, and then a Security Council which would make the real decisions. It would have 5 permanent members, those 5 being the 5 powers that would eventually win World War II. The United States, Britain, France, the Soviet Union, and China. And each one of those powers would have veto power over any sort of resolution. They also finally decided that Germany would be divided into occupation zones, with each one of the victors having their own area to administrate. There were also some territorial concessions to the Soviet Union, but we don't need to worry about those specifically. The final Allied conference was held at Potsdam in August 1945, and here Joseph Stalin met with the new Prime Minister of Great Britain, Clement Attlee, and the new President of the United States, Harry Truman. And here they issued a warning to Japan for unconditional surrender, warning them that they would be devastated if they didn't surrender. They refused to, and so during the conference, Truman ordered the bombing, using the atomic bomb, of Hiroshima. Stalin turned around and refused free elections in Eastern Europe, saying this wasn't going to happen. They did have some things they agreed on during the conference, though. First of all, they agreed to hold war crimes trials for the Nazis involved in horrible acts during World War II. They also agreed that Germany would be demilitarized and denazified. In other words, take the Hitler out of the minds of the Germans and re-educate them and allow them back into the community of Western nations. And finally, they agreed again on the division of Germany into occupation zones and agreed that reparations could be taken by each country from their own zone.
So there you have it. Those are the Allied conferences of World War II. Now, there's an old saying that war makes strange bedfellows, that some people come together and work together in times of war when they wouldn't work together otherwise. And we can see from these conferences that they set the groundwork for two things. Number one, they set the groundwork for a real international community that's going to try and prevent a third world war. So far, knock on wood, we haven't had one. But secondly, they're also really setting a line. And that line's going to be between the communist East and the democratic West. And that line is going to define the Cold War. And that's what's to come. So what's the result of these conferences? Well, they defeated Germany. They won the war. But they created a war of sorts, which is going to last for a really long time. The Cold War. So that's about all we have for right now. Until next time, my name's Paul Sargent. Please make sure to subscribe so you're notified when I put up new videos. And feel free to comment and let me know what you think about this. And tell me if they're helping. Hey, if you're like my students, the AP exam is just a few weeks away. I hope you're studying, I hope you're reviewing, and I hope these help. Have a great day.